Well, welcome back to the show, Bryce. Bryce Blankenagel. Applause,
Thanks
applause.
for having me. It's a pleasure. You didn't jingle us in with your melodious voice. What is going on?
We're going to jingle you.
Oh,
Trust me, you're going to get that shit jingled out of you.
okay.
But I wanted to, before we started tonight's show, I wanted to do a little like inside baseball before you started going, started to get rolling.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, Bryce thought, 3 times on the Zachrilege cast, that seems like enough for a lifetime. And I was like, oh, come on, man, think of the children. And you said, well, now I'm definitely not doing it.
Yeah.
So I asked nicely, and again, you demurred. So finally, I pulled the trump card. No, I mean the God card. I know, but every once in a while I have a backdoor to the Almighty, and I was allowed to transmit the following message that changed Bryce's mind. I command you to repent. Repent, lest I smite you by the rod of my mouth and by my wrath of mine anger, and may your sufferings may be sore. I command thee that thou shalt not covet thine own property, but impart freely to thine appearance on the Zachrilege cast for a 4th time. If thou wilt slight these counsels, thou wilt have to listen to Joseph Smith's latest spoken word album. Misery shalt thou receive if thou wilt slight these counsels. Appear on the podcast. Dance, thou monkey, dance. That's weirdly specific.
And it sounds familiar, like almost like it was lifted from somewhere or something. I'm struggling to remember.
Yeah,
but,
you're struggling to remember something that's lifted from Mormon history,
that's what it was. That's
probably
I thought I'd read that before, but there were some things changed, and I'm curious, what is the specific property you're wanting me to part with here?
I think you have to mortgage your property to be on the show. I don't even know.
Wow.
Or could I I don't know. I'd have to think of what book would I have to come up with that has no punctuation or uppercase, lowercase, or grammar that you would have to publish 5,000 copies and make a publisher go insane. So,
well, yeah. Hey, if you ever want to publish your own Zachrilege Urantia text, I would love to be your scribe for that. You'll sit there with your face buried in a hat. I'll write down your musings in a cryptic, unknown language, which is to say, I'll make everything up, and then we'll start a cult, and it'll be awesome. And then we can finally get all of the tax and legal benefits of religion, right? Sounds good.
I've often wondered, like atheist content creators, they've some of them have. It seems like they've joined other cults, but it doesn't seem like too many people have started their own, which is unusual because we have that going for us. So I'm gonna do this is a better late than never. So this is the welcome to the Zachrilege cast. Bryce Blankenagel, that would be welcome back to the show. Happy National Prayer Breakfast Day. I suggest Jesus. It's perfect.
Is it National Prayer Breakfast Day today?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's today. Although I think Biden actually took it. He wasn't there in person, to get feted or hey, you're the new Jesus, because they definitely think he isn't. Even though he actually goes to church, and he actually probably could say a couple of verses besides 2 Corinthians or whatever.
Quote from the book of Judas.
Okay, so tonight, now, Bryce, of course, when you talk to somebody once or twice a year, you think, okay, I got this guy. So Mr. Amber Ale, the one chosen true chosen ale. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking well. I'm only 10 minutes in. So this is a local beer. Let me see. There we go. Kennesaw Bourbon Ale. So this is a local brewery, Dry County Spirits. So they do spirits and beer. So it's a bourbon barrel ale out of just down the road. And then, of course, for later, in honor of Mr. Got Hitched, better half. This is not an accurate picture.
That's right.
This is a Zach beer. So it's an old ale brewed with molasses and aged in maple syrup bourbon barrels. So it's It's kind of like a boozy toffee.
It sounds like a
Really
kind of
boozy.
beer that you would have to chew it to get it down, but it
I
sounds
could drink
pretty
it.
good. You drink it? Okay. All right. You're just
Uh-huh.
drinking beer normally, like a normal person. Yeah. Well, I have betrayed the one true beer, which is to say amber ale. And tonight I've gone with some scotch instead. I find it slightly more efficient than downing a few amber ales, but still delicious.
That would probably be the final trip for me down the hill is to get into like spirits because I have like a bourbon barrel aged beer, but an actual bourbon, it's still kind of turpentine-esque. It's very strong for me. I did have a Scotch barrel beer, but it was actually a s'mores beer, and it was pretty good. Except
Hmm.
with beer, for some reason, the graham cracker they do like cinnamon, and I just can't do cinnamon in beer anymore.
Huh.
But
That actually sounds delicious. A dessert beer. I would take that.
yeah, that's like
Absolutely.
half to 2/3 of what I have around. But what got you into the Scotch? Like, have you been into this, or is this a new acquisition?
So I've always kind of been a fan of whiskey, never never a whiskey connoisseur or anything. And I don't know, there's just something that is special about sitting back and sipping on a whiskey as opposed to drinking a beer. I don't know if it's just like an internal thing that I think of. It just makes me feel like a Banff, right? I'm like, yeah, I got my whiskey. It's a nice night. I'm sitting by the fire in my red robe with a corncob pipe. It's a lifestyle that I wish I could have. And I figure that the best way to get to that lifestyle is starting with drinking in accordance with it. So, yeah.
Well, there you go. When in Podcastville or whatever this is. So as we've mentioned, so you did get hitched last year. So what was it like getting married in like COVID times? In general, since this sounds like first wife, you're sticking with the one, right?
For now, yeah. I mean, the one is about all that I can handle for the time being. Yeah, it was kind of weird because we had made all of our plans and reservations and bookings and everything prior to COVID times. So we just kind of had to nix all of our plans and get back all of our deposits and everything. And instead, we just went to the beach with a couple people from our quarantine pod who served as our witnesses and a photographer, and it was just like the five of us and an officiant who came by to do the ceremony and sign the paperwork and then left, and that was pretty much it. We just went to the beach. It was kind of fun dunking my wife and myself into the ocean in her wedding dress and me in my wedding suit. It was a good time. The photographer said he'd never seen that happen before.
Yes.
But yeah, needless to say, family was very disappointed. But, not much you can do about it. It's the Rona times.
I mean, you have to adjust to the times. But I do hear that you might be moving away since you're currently in Seattle. You're going.
Yeah. Well, I guess away is relative because I'm going to be moving towards you. We will be moving to Pennsylvania come July or August of this year. So that ought to be interesting. Never lived on that side of the nation before, so you'll have to show me around the East Coast,
Oh, sure. We got, I think the Bill and Susie Barroom Atheist, I think they're still in that Philly area, which I think is going to be sort of close to where you are.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm sure you're excited because you're going to be closer to, the home of, well, no, that's Missouri. That's where everything happened. But initially it was the burned out district, which isn't going to be far from you.
I'm going to be living right on the Susquehanna River, actually, which is, for anybody interested in Mormon history, is where some of the writing of the Book of Mormon took place. That was 40 miles from where we're going to be living. So yeah, the birthplace of Mormonism is where I'll be living for better or worse.
For better or worse. What's like the reverse? They went east to west. You're going, west to east.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you deconstruct it, right? You just do everything that it did, only do it in reverse, and then it's like speaking Alex Trebek backwards, and he voips into non-existence.
Well, as someone who's so into very detailed content, when it came to like proposing, were you able to, get it down to a shorter? You're like, well, love technically came into existence millions of years ago, and you might want to sit down. This could be a while.
All right, Zach. All right, a little bit. That's kind of how it turned out. But truth be told, my fiance my wife actually proposed to me first, and then I accepted, and then turned around and proposed to her the next night, and she accepted. So it was, we kind of knew it was coming, and I had already given her the speech on the flight over there, so we didn't have, and I was able to keep it within the 15 hours of the flight, barely, right? So we were properly prepared for when the time actually came. Yeah,
a true love, like Joseph and Emma.
Yeah. Hey, if you can find somebody who will tolerate you being a windbag, you hold on to that person. You do not let go.
Or you're going to have to rename your studio if you're in a new location. Is it Ground Gnome Studio? Is that right?
It is Ground Gnome Studios. No, it's still going to remain Ground Gnome Studios. It's Ground Gnomes is an idea more than an actual physical place. So I will be taking the studio with me, which is to say I'll be moving from what you see around me, which is my living room, into an actual office, because we'll be moving into a house when we live in Pennsylvania instead of a tiny, tiny, dinky apartment here in Seattle. Looking forward to that a lot. Really want to live in a place that has bedrooms.
I bet. Yeah, that's true. And, usually when I do interviews, it's all about like, we're going to get along, we're going to agree. But, I'm going to have to briefly accuse you of selling a bill of goods. So you call your show Naked Mormonism, but I clearly see a shirt. So what's happening there? Is there
well, this isn't Naked Mormonism.
Patreon? Yeah, it's not. Yeah, this is not going to be a case where like some people have been on. They're like, I'm just going to use your audio for my show. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not going to be your show. Imagine it's 1843.
That's right. Well, the thing is you got to hold something back for the OnlyFans, so I can't just like be flaunting my stuff everywhere I go.
I mean, if that's how you roll, yeah, I guess,
I mean, you have to be judicious. You don't want to get arrested. You don't want to offend people. You don't want to make people uncomfortable. You want to make sure that the people who are joining in the higher tier content are there of their own accord and volition, and not going to get something that they don't expect. You got to be really careful. Well, sure. I mean, I'm talking to you. Like, I know you're the OnlyFans king, so I don't need to tell you.
Well, to offend people have to like consume your content. So I think I'm pretty safe. It's a few friends and family, and my cat over there. He's so excited. He's napping. I'm surprised he stays. Usually leaves, but he's like, I'm gonna sleep. Just don't keep it down if you don't mind. So did you need a break? I'd say a break, but for you, a break is like, I'm only going to do like 3 shows from Mormonism, since on Naked Mormonism, spoiler alert, you did your like Road to Carthage series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of how that transpired was it obviously felt like kind of a natural place to go to put the show on hiatus with the death of Joseph Smith. Because at that point, everything gets far more complicated, and there are more larger than life figures to talk about. So I put the podcast on hiatus for the purposes of devoting the time that I normally spent writing scripts to writing the book instead. because every week is anywhere from a 12 to a 25 page essay on Naked Mormonism, because everything is scripted on that show. So if I'm instead putting all of the hours writing that normally go to that into the book instead, then the chances are that the book is going to turn out a lot better, as opposed to if I were trying to spread myself too thin and still do the podcast while writing the book. So that is to say that Naked Mormonism went on hiatus for the purpose of writing the book. And while we were in this transition phase of Annie getting a job and us moving across the country and everything, I'm really trying to get the book done during this phase. And then once that hiatus is over, that comes to rebooting the show. And I have a few conceptions of the direction I want to take the show after this, and I'm not sure which direction is going to be best and is going to best serve kind of the very niche audience that I've cultivated.
Yeah, your audience must be satisfied with your content. So is the book going to be kind of the history of Mormonism that you've covered in Naked Mormonism so far, or is it? Do we dare say even in more time? Because I'm trying to think how long a time period. Because I was listening to the Mythvision, which kind of starts from the beginning, and I forget how many years it's from then to Joseph Smith dying. But is that kind of time frame you're looking for in terms of the book?
Yeah, so the conception of the book really is to write. So every decade or so, a large biography of Joseph Smith comes out, written by a different author, and they all attempt to take a different view of Joseph Smith and early Mormonism, or seek to expand the basis of research, because we're constantly, the church is releasing new documents. New documents are discovered that offer context and additional information to work with. So about every decade or so, a new biography of Joseph Smith comes out, and I'm wanting to write that biography for the decade of 2020. And what that will hopefully incorporate in all of this is obviously my own personal research into early Mormonism, and that is psychedelics and them being used in the early church. A few scholars have expressed skepticism about psychedelics being there in the early church, but I think that there's enough evidence there. So the biography that I'm writing will hopefully seek to lay out the groundwork for that hypothesis, as well as tell a side of the Joseph Smith story that I think is, I guess, revealed when you incorporate psychedelics into it. And that is more focusing on the criminal aspects of Joseph Smith as a criminal kingpin. So kind of a lot of directions that I want to take it. And I'm, as we were talking before we actually started broadcasting, I'm kind of at a crossroads point where I'm deciding if I want to write a 300-page biography that a bunch of people will read, but is going to be just a quick and dirty, or if I want to write a tome that nobody will read, but maybe some people will buy. I'm just not, I'm kind of not sure where to go with it right now.
Yeah, it's not easy to do that. I would say it's almost like Bart Ehrman's kind of figured it out, even though he has the kind of, he has the degree and all that, but he does write kind of for a more broad audience, which is not a bad way to go. And I mean, with all the Ozarks and Sopranos and TV shows about the anti-hero, it's like Joseph Smith. I mean, come on, this is an American story. I mean, this could he have come up anywhere else? Like the specific time in America, the specific location, and people don't know much. They think of the Mormons are really nice, and I saw Book of Mormon on Broadway, or I saw the South Park episode, and then you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot more to it.
A lot more, yeah.
But has there been serious, I guess, books covering the psychedelics aspect? I mean, you could also talk about, the fact that you co-authored a paper, an actual paper about the psychedelics in the early, and of course, whatever research was involved there, which must have been kind of fun too, if you ended up starting your own religion because of it. Probably not.
Nice, just slide that in there. Yeah, that paper that you're referencing, I mean, that writing that was a 1.5 year endeavor with myself and the 3 co-authors, and that paper lays out in many ways a groundwork for us to work from, but it was also like it was built on the blueprints of earlier research done by one of the co-authors. Back in 2007, he self-published a paper on psychedelics and early Mormonism, and it was presented, and people said this is interesting, and then it fell off of the map. And there was no updates, no revisions, nothing to it until Cody Nakoni and myself came along and did our 2017 self-published paper and Sunstone presentation on it. And after we did that, the author of that original paper from 2007 approached us and asked if we would work with him to publish a new academic journal paper, which is the paper you're talking about. And there hasn't been anybody else that's been doing work on this. I mean, because it's so early, there's no book length titles on this subject. This is groundbreaking research to be doing, and quite frankly, that's because Mormons don't do drugs, right? It takes somebody coming along and reading the early accounts of the visionary period of early Mormonism who has done psychedelics to say, oh, I mean, I've seen this. I mean, I've seen people do these things. I've watched these things happen, to be able to recognize the symptomology as well as the effects that are being described in the early church. So yeah, and lucky for researchers like me who want to do this pioneering work, Mormons don't do drugs, so nobody else is really working on it right now, which all the better, I guess.
It is wild that the kind of religions that are anti kind of alcohol, drugs and stuff, the people who created it probably were on something, and possibly all religion like origin stories have a bit of that to it. And so you said you had to do some personal research of your own. I don't know if you can officially say that.
I wouldn't be a good researcher if I didn't, right? I mean, we can leave it there. You have to understand your subject material.
What was it that was it because like the local, I know there was like talking about like the local Indian tribes were using certain herbs, and that was a big deal when you're living kind of on the frontier, like for any kind of medicine, whether it worked or not, if it just got you high or drunk, okay, that's a win right there. But was it just people saying, okay, here's what like was available in the wild back then, and here's, I mean, obviously it probably, I don't even know, did it come from Mormon sources to get this kind of ball rolling when you first became aware of this kind of aspect of Mormon history?
The thing is it requires a multidisciplinary approach, and very few people who write and publish Mormon history have expertise outside of Mormon history. So where new research really comes along is when somebody with a certain background, a certain expertise, views aspects or views evidence in early Mormonism through their expertise lens. And that's the case with any field of research. Like, this isn't just history, but interweaving those two disciplines of Mormon history and then the history of psychedelics causes you to jump down all sorts of rabbit holes, which involve the history of medicine itself. And like medicine that we have now, the convenient pills that we take, that we purchase over the counter or from the pharmacist or whatever the case is, those are obviously synthesized versions or distilled versions of chemicals that exist around us and have been known about for millennia. Right. So like the earliest medicinal book that we have in book form comes from like 400 CE. And that lays out the foundation and even includes some like hand-drawn pictures of what some of the plants look like and describe some of their effects. When we get into post printing press era, so everything from the 1500s on, these herbal remedy books are a dime a dozen. And that's the thing, is like for people who especially are living in frontier America and expanding further and further west, you may not have access to a doctor, or the doctor you may have access to might not be a very good doctor. So it really behooves any family growing up in that time to know what they can go foraging for that will like taste good in a stew, or will be a painkiller if you rub it on a wound, or can get you high. Or will kill you if you eat too much of it. So this is, in many ways, this is knowledge that was readily available through all of these extremely cheap and widely circulated and available herbal remedy books and physician books, in addition to just institutional knowledge that's passed down through families. You learn from mom what to go pick in the forest, and she tells you what you brought back that's good, that's gonna feed the family, and what you should not touch because it'll hurt you.
Is this a potential advantage for someone like you who's like a history kind of communicator who maybe isn't so steeped into the field, where you can actually branch out a little more than the traditional kind of biographer would?
Yeah, that's very much a double-edged sword, because that does allow me to take a step back and view a less siloed approach to Mormon history. And that goes for any history researcher or communicator. You have the ability to step back and see things in a different light, or through a different lens, or a bigger picture or something. Because researchers, academia in general is very siloing. The system that we have of higher education cultivates people who are hyper specific and hyper specialized in something, and they tend to view the entire world through the lens that they have become an expert in. So someone like me who doesn't have a traditional degree, I can come along and say, hey, maybe we should consider this or consider this, something that lives outside of the box or outside of those silos. But then also, because it is, I'm a communicator. I'm not a degreed historian. I don't have any academic degree of any sort. That also opens me up to, attacks from people who are degreed, because I'm not an actual historian. And that's just something I have to contend with. That's something I deal with. And I'm comfortable living in that space of being a history communicator who also does a bit of ground level research as well.
Live in both worlds. It's not a terrible thing to be, but even though you're working on a book and you're in theory, on a break, you just can't escape Mormonism. It's just never a thing for you. So how did you get started in this, which seems like ever expanding series on Mythvision, with friend of the show, David Fitzgerald, helping you out?
So the host of Mythvision, Derek, reached out to me a while ago and said, hey, I want to do a YouTube series on early Mormon history. And I generally, I don't always pay a lot of mind to people who want to do that, because frankly, it's huge. It's such a huge topic, right? Like, my podcast, out of 200 and nearly 230 episodes, each of those episodes are an hour to 3 hours a piece. I only scratched the surface, proverbially. So when someone says they want to do a YouTube series on early Mormonism, I'm like, all right, well, we can't do it unless we're going to do a proper series, because Bryce Blankenagel, I am incapable of doing an hour or an hour and a half long, the overview of Mormon history. I can't do it. I'm too much of a windbag. I can't shut the fuck up.
Trying to imagine what it'd be like, those commercials where they do the language at the end, but it'd be that for you to do. I can't even imagine. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like,
doing 150 years of history where you're covering like a couple of months in an episode, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe even,
you're leaving a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, I'm sure, even with your deep dive, relatively speaking.
Absolutely. So after Derek sent me that, and I essentially kind of just ignored it because I looked up his YouTube channel and there's nothing on there about Mormonism. I'm like, why do you want to do this? I didn't really pay it much mind. But then David reached out and was like, hey, I got this friend who wants to do a series on Mormonism, and he asked me to join him in it, and I'd like to have you on board with it. And I said, hey, if David Fitzgerald wants to do it and gives his stamp of approval to this YouTube channel, then hey, let's do it. So from that point forward, we workshopped the idea of how we were going to handle it, what we were going to do. And we said, all right, so we're going to lay out a basic format, a 12-episode timeline, and go through the entirety of early Mormon history in those 12 episodes. And then we'll have like 1 or 2 episodes that get from the Nauvoo era into the modern day. And we all 3 agreed, hey, that sounds really good. So here we are 20 parts later, and we're almost to the death of Joseph Smith and to the schism crisis.
So what is it the time period you've covered in Naked Mormonism? It's considered early, like it's the life of Joseph Smith, and then
that's still considered early Mormon history. It doesn't convert to like not early Mormon history until the 20th century, really.
Yeah, I was thinking like this is sort of an overview of what you've done in your show, but it's still, I mean, I saw 15 episodes. I guess you said 20. I mean, you may have recorded more.
Yeah, we have quite a few in the bag right now that are just waiting.
I forget about the YouTube aspect where you're doing like a video work. I mean, even editing audio takes time if you do that sort of thing, which who would? Oh, oops. But doing the video stuff where you're throwing in, little different stuff as time goes on. Okay, here's an interesting one. We talked a little bit about politics, so I was wondering, can we learn something making a connection between like Joseph Smith and Donald Trump? So we have like a cult with a leader, and eventually the leader is going to die, and then the movement continues after. So what can we possibly learn from that kind of connection? I can't say they're exactly connected, but it's it's an interesting one.
Well, the similarities are a bit striking, I would say. Let me back up. So one thing that I do appreciate extensively about living through the timeline we're currently living is that I can see analogies to it, and I've like wondered, what were people doing in Germany in 1938 when it was the rise of the Third Reich, and there were prison camps cropping up all over the nation. There was war going on, but generally speaking, the German people didn't feel the effects of the war itself, aside from rationing supplies or from working in the war industry itself. And I wonder, it's like, did they know about the prison camps? What did they do about it? Turns out that's what we're living in today, right? Because America has its prison camps. It utilizes a massive workforce, largely of minorities, as slave labor. We are committing genocide in various places on the globe right now through proxy wars, and we are not speaking up when other nations are in the process of committing genocide upon racial or religious minorities. So it's interesting to live in this timeline because you can see what happens or what the day-to-day life is like during events that we read about in our history books. So all of that is to round back to your question. The similarities between our past president and Joseph Smith are painfully obvious to me, because it's the playbook of the despot, of the criminal kingpin, of the narcissistic cult leader, and what they do and how they are able to motivate propaganda and elitism in order to move and sway entire populations of people. And that was just as much true for Joseph Smith moving and swaying 20,000 Mormons as it is Donald Trump moving and swaying 50 million Americans. The same exact playbook. And it's truly interesting to me of like, did these people study past cult leaders, and did they understand the mechanisms that cult leaders use and then utilize them themselves? or is this just a personality type that is more likely to fall into the same trappings of using the despot's playbook? And I don't know which of those is true. Maybe it's a combination of both, but it shows to me how somebody like Joseph Smith, who was a complete idiot in so many ways, who was a terrible businessman, who was a liar, a cheater, and a stealer, could rise to the level of national and in some places international renown and notoriety that he did, and still his movement lived on after he was assassinated. It's incredible, because the shit that we've seen in the past 4 years, it's not going away, right? It may be taking a bit of a brief respite right now, but it's not going away. It's not going anywhere. So
yeah, it's definitely shaped a lot of stuff. And the social media stuff, like, it was probably a big deal for Joseph Smith to be able to get to publish his book at that time, because who had books back then? But as you mentioned, I think it was the first anniversary of your show, you did a long deep dive into the Book of Mormon and what kind of books did Joseph Smith have access to, like what kind of access. I mean, it's weird because Trump, I mean, he talked about politics, but he obviously didn't get into it until a later aspect in his life. But the whole criminal mastermind, I'll say, and quotes, I don't know about the mastermind part, but the criminal part is definitely there. And the system kind of allowing it is similar, and wondering how, will there be a splintering, because he's kind of the guy running it. And then once Joseph Smith dies, it's going to be obviously a struggle, but fun as well for you to cover, is the splinter groups that came up after, and then how kind of Brigham Young was the winner, and he became a pretty strong person in his own mind.
Yeah, and fantastically wealthy as well,
and a good football team, university anyway, but
good good football team. Well, in that does push back another question when viewing kind of the high level overview of why was Mormonism successful when hundreds of other religions at the time were not successful, or may have cropped up and died immediately, or are not considered ranked among the world religions today. And my primary response to that is it's just a matter of statistics, right? You have 5,000 religions cropping up in the span of a 150-year time. At least a couple of them are bound to survive long after the founder of it has died. And that's really what happened with Mormonism. There are obviously a lot more factors that come into play when it comes to, the charismatic leader of Joseph Smith, being murdered, dying as a martyr according to his people. And then the businessman comes along afterwards and organizes everything the way that it can be a perpetuating organization with hierarchy and structures. And then Western expansion, obviously, when you have a group of people who are moving out to an area that's previously not inhabited by European settlers, and they take a firebrand approach to all of the natives that live in the area, they're gonna survive. They're gonna flourish. They're going to cut off the resources from those Native American groups and absorb them themselves. So there are a number of factors that kind of went into it, but it really is just a matter of statistics. Eventually you're going to have a religion that'll propagate. Eventually you're going to have a Donald Trump that will rise to prominence in national politics and be elected president and completely ass fuck the whole country and all world politics. That's just going to happen eventually. You hope that's counterbalanced by, a truly great leader comes along afterwards or before to patch up all of the pieces and, carry us into the next generation. Who knows if that's going to happen, but the monsters get popular, and that sucks.
Well, this is why historians and people who really pay attention to history, you should pay attention to them. Now, I had just finished, since I got a Hulu subscription, watching the show 11/22/63, which is about a guy's attempt to go back in time and stop JFK from being killed.
Oh,
now I'm not going to ask you like, hey, what Mormon event would you try to stop? But are there specific events or even time periods in Mormon history that you would like to, maybe the witnesses signing, they actually saw the gold plates, something, or would you want to just meet with Joseph Smith and like have an hour to talk to him? What kind of, like, if you're able to actually go back?
if I could be a dick with a
from what you
time
saw.
machine, basically.
And not really change anything, but just be a witness and be able to like be in that time so you could find out some things that you could not find out otherwise.
So there are kind of a couple of questions into that. If I could go back and change something, what would that event be? Or if I could go back and witness something happen, what would that be?
It's more the witness, but actually, you're the expert. What side of that intrigues you more?
Witnessing more than anything, because there are just so many questions of butterfly effects that I mean, we can write and create all of the sci-fi novels and movies that we want that explore the aspects of time travel and the impacts of traveling back in time, changing an event, and how that event unfolds in present times. I think those are some interesting questions, and it's all speculative history, and they're fun conversations. To actually witness something, this answer changes kind of based on what I'm researching. So, for example, if I wanted to witness something that would prove my hypothesis of psychedelics in early Mormonism, I would go back to the earliest camp meetings of early Mormonism. I would attend the meetings on the Isaac Morley farm, their raves, where they would stay up until 3, 4, 5 in the morning or whatever, partying, and I would want to see, steal a bottle of the wine and check it out and try it myself. I would love to see what was going on there. And if I'm studying something like a specific participant in the doctrine of polygamy, I would want to go back in time and have a conversation with a very specific person, like Maria Lawrence or Eliza R. Snow or Sarah Pratt. I want to go back and talk to these individuals and get what their sense of the situation is and what they think about it, and hear what their thoughts are on it. And going back and changing an event, that's always tough. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'd smack Joseph Smith Sr. right before he came, right? I'd make it so that good old Joey was never born, right? But then that opens up the questions of like, okay, so then we wouldn't be talking Mormonism, but we might be talking about some other religion that was equally or even more damaging. So like that doesn't really solve any problems. So I don't know. There's kind of a lot of questions, and I encourage yourself as well as any viewers to explore those questions yourself. And doesn't have to be Mormon history. Obviously, that's my lens. But think back to whatever event is remarkable in your mind. What would you change? Who would you talk to? What would you witness? I think those are fun questions. What about you, Zach? What would you go back and change? What would you want to see?
I don't know. I've been involved, read a lot of time travel stuff, and it always seems to be the South winning the Civil War, and then JFK dying. One of the more interesting books I've read was about Robert Kennedy, and it's an alternate history about him. What happens if he didn't get assassinated, and how America made some major changes because he ends up becoming president, and go in a very different direction. And it's like, is it really that great man thing that's going to change the country and the world? Is it just this one? Because I feel like that's how we got Trumpism and how we sometimes get about even leaders in the atheist community. We get a little too, we don't see them as people, and we think they're going to do these magical things that other people can't do. And more than anybody, studying Joseph Smith, you probably admire him more as a human being than a leader. Maybe admire is not the best word, but him as a 3-dimensional person as well as you can from someone who lived 150 years ago.
Don't ever have heroes. Never have heroes.
What, 180 some years? It's been a long time.
Anyway. 100, about that, 180. But yeah, don't have heroes, right?
To do math.
Heroes aren't real. Heroes only exist in comic books and movies, right? Like
all heroes
don't have heroes.
Well, so I mean, we kind of talked about, getting married and how you had to deal with that in COVID times. How's it been as a content creator over the past year dealing with COVID and all that? Although for someone who does like a podcast, it's like, well, what changes, other than not being able to potentially like meet people in person and travel.
Doing online conferences this last year was a really interesting experience, and quite disappointing as well, because part of the fun of my job is going to Mormon conferences and meeting my friends and colleagues and attending with friends. And not having those has really sucked, because there's just something that's very, very different about going to a convention center and seeing people face to face, getting dinner with them, as opposed to joining a Zoom hangouts. Those are just very, very different things. It's a whole different experience. Not necessarily bad, just different. That's really been the largest impact. For me personally, putting the podcast on hiatus, I did so with the understanding that I'm taking a massive pay cut doing it. And that's okay, because we're in a situation where I can take a pay cut and we're still fine. We can still pay the bills. So I viewed that more as like, I'm like, hey, listeners, you're awesome. Thank you for supporting me so much through the entire, podcast. Now you're going to get all that content for free. And then when COVID is over, when things have reset, we're at the new normal, I'll reboot the podcast, and then I'll go back to taking your money that you're generously offering me. But this is kind of a hiatus, both for myself in researching and producing the show, as well as it is a hiatus for the people who give me their money in order to allow me to make that content. So I kind of voluntarily said, this is a good time to stop podcasting, a good time to stop taking people's hard-earned money when there's economic uncertainty going on. And otherwise, like, day-to-day didn't change much. I still work from home. I'm not able to go anywhere and do anything now, so I've become very familiar with every single pathway through the park that's near our apartment complex, because that's all I can do is go for walks during the day. But I mean, really not a whole lot has changed, except, Annie works from home now as well as I work from home. Yeah, I think it's different for everybody though, and different for all content creators.
Well, as we get close to the end, I believe this was your last Naked Mormonism like Q&A. You're talking about anime. So someone who's never, I think, witnessed any of that, what are some recommendations?
I'm currently halfway through season 2 of Attack on Titan. Spectacular show. Truly an amazing show. My go-to recommendations are Avatar: The Last Airbender, just because it's so good. It's truly so good. And Full Metal Alchemist. Those are a couple of my favorites. There are some other niche shows that I've watched that have a much more narrow appeal that I won't recommend because of that narrow appeal. But Avatar, Full Metal Alchemist those are the standard bearers in the anime world, and they're so good for good reason. And Attack on Titan is if you can get past the gore of it, it's a good show. It's a really good show.
Well, you are Mr. Niche, so that's perfect. So even though you're not doing the one podcast, you still have a bunch of other content. So where can people find you while you're in mostly book mode?
So I still do every 2 weeks a headlines-based show. That's Glassbox Podcast. We take on headlines in and out of Mormonism to see what slipped through the cracks. And that's really fun. My co-host Shannon Grover and I have been putting together lately this Boundaries series that she has been spearheading, and it's turned out to be quite remarkable based on a bunch of survey data from our listeners. It's a lot of fun to do a headlines-based show, especially with a co-host that comes from a completely different background from me. Still Mormon background, but she's not a 30-year-old white male. She has a very much different experience in the church than I did. So that, and then, you mentioned earlier, I'm doing the Mythvision series, an overview of Mormon history. We have recorded now 20 of those episodes. I think 15 are broadcasted right now. So there's a few that are in the hopper that are going to be releasing throughout February and March, and we're going to continue recording those. I don't know how many parts the series is going to be, but the feedback on it has been really fun. And it's a YouTube series. And once in a while, a friend from many, many moons ago will just hit me up and be like, "Hey, let's do a show." And I'll be like, "Hey, yeah, let's do it." And which is how we got here tonight. And that's about it right now.
Well, I think that's sufficient. Part 4. I'm going to have to reach out to another deity to get you on in the future, but we'll see how we can pull that off.
Hey, there are lots to choose from, so who knows which one will actually, relay your beck and call to me.
Mm-hmm. And I can promise maybe your own solar system because, planet, whatever. That seems old school. So
that's right. And yes, the reboot should be Never Pants Mormonism. I like that. That's a great title. And I'll sing in every episode like Zach does.
No one can do it like me. It doesn't mean they can't do it better in tune. Whatever that is. Is that the thing? I've never heard of that. All right. Well, thank you, Bryce, for being on again. It's been fun.
Thank you. This was it's fun to check in with you every so often. Thanks for having me on again.
Exactly. It's always good.
Exactly.